Wow, Chris, I don't know if it's like more just delightful to watch your face as you play or Frances's face as she enjoys your amazing music. So some of the passion of that piece reflects some of the passion and some of the turbulence in the heart of someone, one of you actually, that I was in conversation with a couple of weeks ago. As this member of our congregation was thinking about and untangling some of the patterns that she had grown up with as a young person, some patterns that she had been taught as a young person just about sexuality and gender norms. And I wouldn't say that this person was in a spiritual crisis, but definitely in some spiritual turbulence as they're, again, trying to make sense of so much of that. And as we were talking about patterns from childhood and whether or not they show up in our lives as adults, whether or not it's inevitable that those patterns show up in our lives as adults, the image that kept coming to my own mind in that conversation was just the image of a kaleidoscope. So simple and yet so powerful in some of the beauty that it can offer us if we slow down enough to look through that keyhole. And, as we were wondering, are we destined to repeat these patterns? No matter what we do, can we really be the person that we want to be? My answer to this person and my answer to you all is always yes. Absolutely. That belief is at the heart of our troop community, that we can see the whole and holy person that is each and every one of you, and that you're able to claim the whole and holy person that you are and to bring that in here in our community. So this image of a kaleidoscope, my guess is that at some point in your life you've had the opportunity to pick one of those up, yes? Yay! And these intricate, colorful designs that you see, they're designs that are only going to show up one time. I don't think it's possible to capture the exact same design again, a little bit like a snowflake, perhaps. And it's replaced by this succession of fascinating light-filled art as we look through it. And it seems a little bit magical, but it's scientific, darn it. The images are formed by light that's filtering through glass that's set at certain angles, and that light and the reflection from the glass and mirrors illuminates just ordinary objects that are put in that kaleidoscope, sometimes buttons, sometimes beads, sometimes colorful pieces of glass. Did you ever make one at home on your own or at camp as part of a project? And those shifting patterns in a kaleidoscope remind me of a poem from May Sarton. In the beginning of the poem, she writes, "Now I become myself. It's taken time, many years and places. I have been dissolved and shaken, worn other people's faces, run madly as if time were there, terribly old, crying a warning." And how many of us are in that process of dissolving and shaking up our own identities, beginning to maybe take off other people's faces that they tried so hard to put on us, trying to take off our skins, as Karina lifted up in her reflection earlier, as we eagerly wait for those shifting patterns to finally settle into a pattern that makes sense for us and the life that we want to live. One of the wonders of a kaleidoscope is that while it's a really simple device, examining the beauty that's contained within it does require our focused attention. I cannot imagine being able to look inside a kaleidoscope while I'm Instagramming or driving or any of the other number of things that we do when we think we can do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things relatively well all at the same time. creating religious community, a spiritual home in which each one of you, with all of your complexities and identities, creating a home in which you can be seen and heard and celebrated for all of who you are. It also requires that kind of loving focus and attention. This morning, our worship theme centers lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer voices and experiences here at Troop. And we're doing this today because there are indeed ways that the queer community is marginalized in Unitarian Universalism. And we need to open up the circle and be able to center those voices and experiences. So some of our worship elements today, our hymns, our readings, our music, they are from people who identify as queer. And you may be wondering right now, Reverend Tera, if we're centering those voices in worship, why are you in the pulpit today? And that's a totally valid question for you to have, but it's very deliberate that the message today is coming from me, your minister, your straight, cisgender, white, female minister. And that is because it's important for those of us who identify as straight, whether clergy or lay leaders or religious professionals, to think of ourselves as being leaders in this work. As one of my colleagues calls it, it's queer accomplishship work that we are doing, and that we're not leaving the burden of it to our friends in the LGBTQ community to shoulder all of the emotional and sometimes physical work all on their own, that we carry it together. And also, because when it comes right down to it, when we think about what needs to happen in our congregation so we can center voices, it's really those of us who identify as straight that need to get out of the way some and open up the circle so others can step in. And that's the work that my straight parishioners and I will be doing together. And we need to ask, who feels like they can be all of who they are when they walk in here? And who feels like they need to leave a part of themselves at the door in order to fit in or in order to be accepted here? My friend and colleague, Reverend Keith Cron, he at one point directed the Unitarian Universalist Office of Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Concerns. He now directs the Ministerial Settlement Office, and he wrote about our Unitarian Universalist commitment to welcoming the sacred in each and every person, and specifically those that identify as LGBTQ. In his words, listening and paying attention are spiritual practices. They're also acts of justice. There was a time when I saw the number of queer people in our congregations on the rise, and now it's on the decline. We think we've done that. We're welcoming. We support marriage equality. Sexual orientation doesn't matter anymore. Anyone can come here. And yet I wonder, are we listening? Are we paying attention? There is a time and age for deep listening, being in community, and respect. Do we notice who is speaking? Do we notice who is in the room? We have to notice who speaks, who's in the room, whom we listen to, and what people say. We must notice who is not in the room and who needs to be here with us. Over a decade ago, this congregation went through a program designed to help us be more intentionally welcoming and affirming to people who identify as LGBT. I don't think the Q was in it at that time. And that was the Welcoming Congregation Program. And I know at least two of you were in the congregation at that time, Jean and Ann, when we went through that. But most of us weren't here yet when that happened. And like a kaleidoscope, that particular program reflected light on ways our congregational culture could change at that time to be more welcoming and inclusive, but we've developed a much more vibrant pattern in our faith community and in queer communities, like a kaleidoscope whose beautiful colors and shapes are always moving. The needs have changed, the realities have changed, the identities have continued to shift into more fuller expressions of who people can and want to be and live into. So the initials LGBTQ, that no longer encompasses the whole of the queer community. It now includes more sexual and gender identities. Q for queer and questioning, I for intersex, A for asexual, and some people also say ally. And the plus is meant to cover anyone not included. And my guess is after worship, some of you, please, will let me know some initials that I have left out today. I am always in a process of learning. And we live in a world where pride parades have gone mainstream. We live in a world where retailers like Target and Banana Republic and Gap sell pride t-shirts in the month of June. We live in a world where a gay man is running for Democratic presidential nomination with his husband standing beautifully and lovingly right by his side. We live in a world where gay and lesbian weddings are finally legal and joyfully celebrated and held as sacred. So a straight person could think, what's the big deal? We're welcoming here, and sexual orientation, it doesn't really matter anymore. We're all the same. But we know it does indeed matter. One reason it matters is that queer youth contemplate suicide at 3 times the rate of heterosexual youth. We know this matters because fatal violence disproportionately affects trans women of color. We know this matters. GLAAD, the world's largest LGBTQ media organization, tracks the president's record on policy and rhetoric, and they've counted more than 92 attacks against the queer community. It matters. And it matters right here in our religious home. We don't have to look outside our doors. In Unitarian Universalism, transgender people still struggle to find community and just understanding about what that means. They struggle with being able to hear someone use their correct pronouns that they have chosen without the other person giggling. It matters in Unitarian Universalism because bisexual UU suffer from invisibility in our churches. And it matters in Unitarian Universalism because asexual, intersex, and polyamorous UUs wrestle with this very progressive faith that still has a hard time honoring the truths and experiences that they bring into the room. And so it's time for us to take up our kaleidoscope and shake it around a little bit and let some new images and identities emerge. So here's what I know about you all as a people. I know that when it comes to welcoming people, I give you an A++++. You're really good at it. And I brag about it all the time whenever anybody asks me and they give me space to do that. And I'd like us to move into welcoming 2.0 version because y'all have got the 101 down. You're good. And the 2.0 version takes us from being a congregation that's welcoming and inclusive into us finding a way to shift into a community that's more queer normative. What does that mean? The synagogue I belong to is the world's first LGBT synagogue, and this summer, Rabbi B'nai Lappi spoke there about the power of what she called queer normative spaces. So she described the welcoming strategy of the Reformed Jewish movement 20 years ago, and it sounded to me a lot like that of Unitarian Universalism. She said that in the 90s, mainstream Jewish world, they came up with the idea of inclusion, and we know that word too, inclusion, and mainstream congregations would do outreach to LGBT folks and say, come in, we want you to be here, we want you to be included as part of our community. And she says at that time in the Jewish world, when they were not so welcoming to LGBT people, that any synagogue who did that, she said the thought of being included rather than excluded, that it was amazing. That any shred of acceptance just made people feel grateful to have a place in the pew. And that it didn't matter that they had to stifle some of their own identities and expressions in order to fit in to those mainstream spaces. And she invites the Jewish community, and I invite this community to move beyond simple inclusion, to move into a space where we straight identified people learn to shift our own expectations and assumptions, and where we let ourselves be changed and transformed by our LGBTQIA+ faith siblings. Lappi said, queer normative space is world-changing and revolutionary, and it is good not only for the queer people, but for everyone who comes inside of it, because it lets all of us live a little bit more into that person we were put on this earth to be. And how do we get there, though? And how do we even start the process? This year, Troop will participate in what's called the Welcoming Renewal Program. It's from the Unitarian Universalist Association, and through worship services and learning modules and celebrating days of observance that are important in the queer community, we're going to begin to center the voices and experiences of people who identify as queer. We're going to shake our collective kaleidoscope, not allowing the images there to settle in, but letting them emerge, growing more and more vibrant. It might mean that sometimes those of us who identify straight might start feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Is that okay, though? To come to Troop and feel a little bit uncomfortable? I think so. It might be we experience things that we think, is this really supposed to happen at Troop? Well, I think it is now supposed to happen at Troop. It means some of us are going to have to let go a little bit of some of our preconceived expectations of what it even means to be in common communal religious space. The word kaleidoscope comes from Greek words that mean a beautiful form to see. A beautiful form to see. And may each of us become the self we were meant to be, the self we continue to become in this world. I'm excited about being on this journey together. Amen. And our closing hymn comes from Unitarian Universalism. It's answering the call of love, number 1014. And a little bit about this hymn. It was written back in 2008 when a lot of Unitarian Universalist congregations, including our denomination, were moving toward marriage equality and advocating and witnessing on behalf of all people being able to get married. And at the time, we were standing on the side of love. And now, because of our folks who are bringing accessible issues to us, we've shifted our language, we've shaken the kaleidoscope a little bit, and now we're answering the call of love to be inclusive of all of those, no matter whether your body is going to stand or move or sit on the pew as we sing together. Please rise, number 1014, answering the call of love.